Здравствуйте, товарищи. Welcome back to Russian Through Propaganda. We're on day 5 today, and today we have a really short lesson, mainly to give you more time to practice your cursive. So remember that that usually doesn't present a major problem for most students. I think it's just a matter of practicing it a little bit. You learn it by doing it. The main thing is just to check your work against the answer keys provided and make sure you're not missing those important details, especially the hooks that you need to begin letters ya, L, and M, especially when you're connecting them to a preceding letter. And also just issues of connecting the letters in general. I think generally they flow together pretty logically, but in some cases it may not be completely intuitive. And if I think back to when I was learning to write, a couple of letters that gave me trouble were N and maybe also K, right? The Russian N and Russian K, of course, N and Ka, because they connect from the top. You sort of reach up and make a little hump and then come back down before forming the letters. So a couple of those may be a little bit uh, counterintuitive. But again, I think in a matter of weeks, you'll develop your own little style and things should move forward very smoothly. So anyway, now that we've learned the alphabet and we've learned pronunciation and we know how to write Russian, we can barrel ahead with actually learning some Russian. And today is again just a very soft introduction, uh, learning how to greet people, introduce yourself in a very basic way. Uh, and so we could also take this opportunity to just practice pronunciation a bit more, now using actual phrases, right? So listen very carefully to the way we're pronouncing these phrases. Continue to watch for stress, right? It's really hard to overstate how important that is from the very beginning to be paying attention to what stress is, where it falls in a given word. So always in the textbook be looking for that underlined vowel. Um, okay, so let's start today before we introduce ourselves. Talking about how Russian names work. If you've ever read a Russian novel, you were maybe a little bit mystified by how many names a given person could have, right? Between their full name, their formal name, uh, their first name, and all these short forms of their first name, all these diminutive forms, nicknames. So the list goes on and on. And we're going to talk about that in more detail later. Today, we're just going to give a very quick overview of it. Let's look at some Russian names for, well, famous Russian poets. The first, you may not have heard of if you're new to Russia, Pushkin. He's indisputably the most important Russian poet and still universally loved in Russia, often quoted, often cited. Anyway, his full name is Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin. So what's going on there with that name? You see, it has three parts. The first one is, of course, the first name. In Russian, that's called an imya. And we noted that word imya is kind of funny for us, at least right now, because even though it ends in a ya and looks like it's a feminine noun, it's actually a neuter noun. So it belongs to a rather peculiar and very limited uh, number of neuter nouns that end in a mya, right? An M and a ya. So just file that away for now. We're not really going to be working with those nouns for the time being. Uh, we'll just see isolated examples of a couple of them. So you have the emia, which is Alexander. Then comes not a middle name, but an otchestvo. An otchestvo is that word is from the word отец, which means father, and отчество translates into English as patronymic, right? So it's a name based on your father's name. So this is something you get automatically as a Russian, right? Whatever your dad's name is, there's a set version, a patronymic version of that father's name, one for male children, one for female. So there's kind of a masculine and feminine version of it. And so that allows you, if you know a person's patronymic, you know their father's name. So Pushkin's patronymic was Sergeyevich, and you might guess that, yes, his father's name was Sergey. And finally, we have his family name, his last name. In Russian, it's called familia. So do note that familia is a bit of a false friend. It doesn't mean family, it means last name, family name. We saw the word the other day for family, which is semya. So anyway, Pushkin is his familia. Now, if we were talking about a female version of a female member, excuse me, of the Pushkin family, her last name would be Pushkina. So as we've seen already, and we're going to discuss this more tomorrow, almost all Russian nouns, including names, are marked for gender. And so if you look over Pushkin's name, Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin, you see that we have zero endings, or we could also say that every word ends in a consonant. Um, and so that's very characteristic of masculine nouns. Let's look at another poet. Again, you might not have heard of her if you're new to Russian, but we'll actually read her in book 2 at the end of the first year of this course. By the way, we'll read a lot of Pushkin next year in second year. Anyway, this poet's name is Anna Andreevna Akhmatova. And again, you see the characteristic endings for this woman's name. Anna is her imya. Andreevna is her patronymic or отчество. We can guess that her father's name was Andrei. And Akhmatova, which is actually a pen name, that's not her actual last name, but we would still say that's her familia. That's everyone knows her as Akhmatova. So that's her familia. Okay, so those are the formal, the full versions of typical Russian names. And if we were addressing someone formally, like at a business meeting or some formal occasion, or we're addressing people we don't know well, we would address them using both the name and patronymic. So the first two names, the first two out of three names, are used for formal address. So what would you call a Russian friend if you start making Russian friends? Well, you might guess you'd simply call them by their first name, but generally that's fairly rare. Although I will note that in my experience, I think a lot of Russians in business circles are getting away from using the first name patronymic. It is still used, there's no doubt about that, especially if you're being super formal. But I noticed among colleagues at the company I worked, they would often just refer to each other and address each other using the first name. I think in part because there were a lot of foreigners there who didn't have patronymics. So it may be that custom is sort of giving way, at least in certain circles, to just simply using the first name. But traditionally speaking, and in terms of informal Russian, you would not address, for example, Pushkin as Alexander if he were your friend. You would call him Sasha. So for every standard Russian name, there's a standard kind of short form used in familiar address. The version of Alexander happens to be Sasha, and that's what you'd probably call him. So you may ask if you have any Russian friends, be sure you know what their actual first name is, but more importantly, maybe what you should call them when you're speaking Russian to them. Another example is Mikhail, right? The familiar form of that is Misha. Okay, so similarly for Anna Andreevna, that's what you would call her formally, right? Anna Andreevna, using the imya отчество. But if you're friends with her, you would call her probably Anya, which is again the standard short familiar form of that first name. Now again, we should note that those aren't really nicknames in the sense of some name that we just invented kind of for fun. Russians love to give nicknames, and almost every Russian I know has some kind of a nickname. But these forms we've given here in the book are very predictable. They're standard familiar versions of any traditional Russian name. Okay, so having said that, let's practice introductions, and let's just, again, read through a very short dialogue. You have more conversation practice on the sheet that's available on the website. So let's just read through this mostly for pronunciation right now. And let's begin today by being formal. As we're going to discuss soon, Russians, when they're talking to each other, they always choose between formal address and informal address. And so this first dialogue we have is safe to use with anyone. It's formal. And we'll talk more about why that is very soon. So hello is здравствуйте. Здравствуйте. Remember that we're not pronouncing the V. Здравствуйте. 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 Okay, that may take some practice. As I mentioned, it's kind of unfortunate that the word for hello is arguably one of the hardest words to pronounce that we'll see all year. Anyway, let's get acquainted is давайте познакомимся. Давайте познакомимся. Now, very early on here, there's going to be a lot of grammar that we, of course, don't understand. So let's just learn these as sort of set phrases. But by the end of this book, we'll understand what's going on here grammatically. Anyway, давайте познакомимся, let's get acquainted, right? And again, that's a formal expression. Меня зовут X, right? They call me X. So fill in the blank. That means literally they call me blank. This is an issue we're going to discuss right off the bat, how Russian idioms may differ from English idioms. So when we use the term idiom, we basically just mean the sometimes unique or peculiar way, at least to our ears, that a foreign language has of expressing a very basic idea. And of course, the danger when you're learning another language is assuming that the English idiom will carry over precisely to Russian. Of course, that's not always the case. And so, for example, in English, we say, my name is blank. Well, Russians could say, Moё имя blank or something. Conceivably, they could say that. But they don't, right? They just say that in a different way. They say literally, me they call blank. Меня зовут blank. So меня is the direct object. That means me. Зовут is a verb meaning they call. And then we have the name filled in. So especially early on, you may notice on some of the worksheets and the dialogues, I use very awkward English on purpose because I'm trying to get across what the Russian is actually saying, right? So I may say things like, they call me blank, even though we would almost never say that in English. So just be aware of that. And I think ultimately it's quite helpful because, of course, you know what you would normally say in English. This isn't an English class after all. Okay, so меня зовут Mark, for example, as I would say. And by the way, on your homework, you're going to be researching how to spell and also how to say the Russian version of your name, right? It may not sound exactly the way you're used to pronouncing it. So, for example, I'm not Mark, I'm Mark, right? You with the trilled R and all the rest. So try to get used to that and introduce yourself using the Russian pronunciation, and that'll be easier for Russians' ears to process. They'll have an easier time understanding your name. Okay, so the response is "А как вас зовут?" "А как вас зовут?" And how you they call, right? That's the literal translation. We'll notice in a lot of these dialogues that follow-up questions and responses and so forth often begin with "ah," right? So we just what this person has just stated their name. Now they're sort of following that up with the question, well, what about you? How do they call you? And so they open that question with "ah." We'll see that all over the place. "А как вас зовут?" "Меня зовут Y," right? They call me Y or whatever, right? "Меня зовут Jim" or whatever, right? "Очень приятно познакомиться." Literally, very pleasant to get acquainted, right? So, очень приятно познакомиться. You may notice that form познакомиться is also not pronounced exactly as it's written, right? It's written познакомиться, but Russians normally say познакомиться. And we'll talk more about that when we get to this item in the grammar. Okay, next question. А как ваша фамилия? What's your last name, right? What's your family name? Again, you see that that's a follow-up question here. А как ваша фамилия? Моя фамилия X, right? My last name is fill in the blank. I would say моя фамилия Pettus. And this is a quick issue that you might want to think about and consult with an instructor. When you look up the Russian version of your first and last name using Wikipedia, look up your first and last name, find a celebrity or a politician or something who shares your first and last name. Hopefully you can think of something. I would recommend beginning, if your family background, your native language is not English, I would try to find that family name in Korean or Italian or whatever it may be, right? And then switch the article to Russian, and you'll see, hopefully, the way Russians are very likely to write out your name when they issue you a visa. That'll be sort of the moment you get your quote-unquote the official Russian version of your name. So there's a lot we could say about that, but keep in mind a couple of things. It's not going to sound the way you're used to pronouncing it. So I would just kind of make peace with that and embrace your new Russian sounding name. But in terms of how you write it and how you say it, there are sort of two ways it can go. The Russian transcription may try to sound like your name is actually pronounced, or it may simply mimic the way it's actually spelled. And so for a lot of people, there's, especially in English, right, with our crazy spelling system, that may be kind of a stark difference. So again, typically, if you pull up a Wikipedia page and you pull up the Russian article for that celebrity or whatever, chances are you're going to see what the way Russians are likely to render your name when some bureaucrat looks it up in whatever database and issues your visa. So I would go with that, but maybe if you have questions, ask an instructor or maybe a native speaker to see what's going on there. But to wrap this up quickly, my last name is a good example. It's spelled Pettus, but it's pronounced Pettus, right, with that kind of short U. So when I got my visa, my last name was spelled Pettus, right, with that oos at the end, which really doesn't sound anything like the way it's said in English. But when I introduce myself in Russian, I say Mark Pettus, right? When I'm doing whatever with some Russian, God knows who, I say Pettus, and it's much easier for them to understand, what my last name actually is. Okay, so just keep those things in mind as you're figuring out what your new Russian name is, so to speak. One other question quickly. Sometimes students try to invent patronymics for themselves. I think that there's no point to that. Russians understand that foreigners don't have patronymics. So, my dad's name is Ronald. I don't go around telling people my name is Mark Ronaldovich or something. I think it's just really quite ridiculous, honestly. No Russian will ever ask you for your patronymic. They'll put, if you're issued a visa, they'll use your middle name. So anyway, I would not concoct some patronymic for myself, much less use it in class, because Russians are not going to use it with you. They know you're a foreigner. Okay, so moja familia X, a vasha, right? Follow-up question. What about your last name? Moja familia Y, right? My last name is whatever. Okay, so let's look at one last item today, classroom Russian. So these are some phrases. This is meant mostly for reference. You don't have to learn this by any means. But let's go through it just and practice pronunciation. Again, watch for the stress, listen for vowel reduction, and so forth. But these are some typical phrases that you're likely to hear and use in class. And I think you'll just kind of get used to them over time. So I'm not sure you need to actively learn them, although if you want to, that would be wonderful. Okay, so in Russian is по-русски, and we'll be practicing this fairly quickly in our grammar. That's an adverb actually that means in the Russian way. So you can speak in the Russian way, you can dance in the Russian way, you can do anything in the Russian way. That's по-русски. In English, or in the English way, is по-английски. So repeat those after me. По-русски, по-английски. Okay, do you have questions? Your instructor may ask, У вас есть вопросы? У вас есть вопросы? Or a shorter version, Есть вопросы? Есть вопросы? Are questions, or maybe even more literally, is questions. We'll talk about what's going on here grammatically later. Okay, how can you say you have a question in class? У меня есть вопрос. У меня есть вопрос. That literally means at me is question, and we'll learn that grammar here in the next couple of days. It's very simple. У меня есть вопрос. Нет, вопросов нет. There are no questions. Нет, вопросов нет. What page are we on, right? So just literally asking what page. Какая страница? Какая страница? Here's a common adverb. It means something like understood, I got it, I get it. Понятно, понятно, or literally everything is understood. Все понятно, все понятно. Very common in Russian. Okay, how do you say that in Russian or in English? Very common question. Как это будет по-русски? Okay, so the eta, that word eta, we're going to learn this very soon. That is kind of pointing to something. So whatever we just talked about, whatever we're pointing at, the word eta is kind of standing in for whatever it is. And we're saying, how is this in the Russian way? Or literally, how will that be in the Russian way? Как это будет по-русски? Как это будет по-русски? Or, how will this be in the English way? Как это будет по-английски? Как это будет по-английски? Okay, you can fill in the blank with an English word, for example. Как будет по-русски cat, or whatever, right? Как будет по-русски blank, right? Again, how will be blank in the Russian way? How do you say something in English? Как будет по-английски blank? Как будет по-английски кошка? Right? How do you say кошка in English? Well, по-английски кошка, cat, right? You can answer. Okay, so you'll be using those phrases a lot in class, I'm sure. How is something spelled? Well, in Russian, we say literally, how is this written, using a passive verb. Как это пишется? Как это пишется? Again, notice that пишется, we're not pronouncing that like пишется, the way it's written. We're saying пишется. And again, we'll cover that in depth when we get to that feature of the grammar. And we'll do that, I believe, in chapter 3 of this book. Как пишется слово blank? How is the word blank spelled? And one way to say that, if you say, for example, this is spelled with a K in Russian or whatever the letter is, the Russian idiom is, this is written across blank. So you may hear an instructor say something like, это пишется через K, meaning this is written with a Russian K, a Russian K. This is written across K. Это пишется через K. Okay, here's an important question. Где ударение? Где ударение? Where's the stress? So the Russian ударение, that's the word for stress. It's related to the word udar, which means like a blow, like striking a blow, hitting something. A blow is an udar. And that may help you kind of imagine why I recommend, again, pumping your fist, pounding the table as you hit or strike that stress syllable. Где ударение? Ударение здесь. The stress is here, maybe again pointing to a word on the page or the blackboard. Or you could say, ударение на этом слоге. The stress is on this syllable. Ударение на этом слоге. Okay, here are some commands you may hear in class. Again, you'll get used to them quickly. Читайте, пожалуйста. Читайте, пожалуйста. Read, please. Remember, we don't say пожалуйста, we say пожалуйста. Повторите, пожалуйста. Repeat, please. Повторите, пожалуйста. Translate into Russian, literally translate onto Russian, please. That would be переведите на русский, пожалуйста. Переведите на русский, пожалуйста. Or translate onto English. Translate into English. Переведите на английский, пожалуйста. Переведите на английский, пожалуйста. Hand in your homework. Сдайте, пожалуйста, свою домашнюю работу. It's a bit of a mouthful. Again, you'll get used to hearing it. Сдайте, пожалуйста, свою домашнюю работу. your homework. And that's an accusative, that's a direct object. And we'll learn that ending in chapter 2. So a lot of the stuff that today seems like a total mystery, we'll learn the grammar fairly quickly. Okay, here's a great expression. Молодец. Молодец. Extremely common in Russian classrooms or anywhere really. It means literally something like young guy. It's a masculine noun. It has to do with the word for youth. But you can say this to anyone. It doesn't matter. Anyone, men, women, doesn't matter. So if you said that to one person, you would say молодец, like, hey, you, way to go. Great job. Or to many people, for example, to a classroom, you would say молодцы, right? Way to go, guys. Great. You're great guys. Okay, wrapping up the lesson. Это все на сегодня. That's everything for today. Это все на сегодня. До завтра. Okay, you may notice something funny with this word сегодня. We have a g in there, right? A g, but we don't say сегодня. We say сегодня. So that seems like a weird exception. And again, we're going to discuss it fairly quickly. I believe we'll come to that actually in this chapter already, and more in chapter 2. Okay, so let's look at a few more nouns. Again, let's just treat this as pronunciation practice. And you'll hear these nouns probably coming up in class. So repeat after me and practice pronunciation. Again, watch the udarение, watch the stress. Homework is домашняя работа. Домашняя работа. Another way to say that is домашнее задание. The first one means literally homework. The second means home assignment. Домашнее задание. A quiz or a test is a контрольная. Контрольная. An exam, a borrowed word, of course, is экзамен. Examen. Class, especially a language class, can be called an урок. Урок. In class is на уроке. На уроке, literally on class. That's grammar we'll learn in, I believe, chapter 4 of this book. Okay, a textbook is учебник. Учебник. A page is страница. Страница. Stress, again, ударение. Ударение. Speaking of stress, can you hear the stress on that word? Note that it's not, let's practice misplacing the stress. Ударение, right? Ударение, 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 ударение. It's almost hard to do. Ударение, ударение, right? So those are all incorrect. And you see how drastically that changes the sound of the word. To the extent that if you misplace the stress on certain words, a Russian may literally not understand it. That's how drastically it can affect the pronunciation. So anyway, ударение, ударение. That's the correct stress. Okay, a word ending. Now, some of these are a bit more technical, maybe not quite as useful right in the beginning of our Russian studies, but a word ending is an окончание, окончание. So we're going to be changing word endings a lot in Russian. That's one thing that makes it a difficult language. It's an inflected language, meaning it changes endings all over the place, not only on verbs, but on nouns and adjectives. Pronunciation is произношение. Произношение. A sentence is a предложение. Предложение. Phrase, фраза. Фраза. Construction, конструкция. Konstrukcja. And again, you see how these borrowed words are often very easy to spot. An expression is a выражение. Выражение. An exercise, there's a word you'll hear for sure. Упражнение. Упражнение. Intonation, right? That's how your voice rises and falls, and in various types of sentences or phrases in Russian. We'll talk about this especially when we talk about questions. Anyway, that's intonacja. Intonacja. Grammar is grammatica. Grammatica. A case, nouns in Russian have different cases. We'll talk about that a lot. That's падеж. Падеж. A verb is a gлагол. Gлагол. A preposition is a предлог. Предлог. A noun, this is a bit of a mouthful, is a существительное. Существительное. An adjective is a прилагательное. Прилагательное. A word is слово. Слово. And a syllable is slog. Slog. So some of these grammar terms, you might not hear them too much in class here in the US, but if you take courses in Russian, the instructors are likely to start throwing out a lot of grammar terms in Russian. And I remember when I first started hearing those, I was a little bit stumped because I hadn't really heard a lot of them. So some basics like существительное can be good to file away, especially if you plan on doing study in Russian. Okay, so that's it for today's lesson. Just a bit of practice and basics with dialogues there, introducing ourselves. So tomorrow we'll actually begin studying our grammar. Until then, до свидания, товарищи.